Welcome to the Gamblin Gauchos. I'm Rob Bro. He's Money Mainville. This Sunday night is an exciting one. Next Sunday night could be everything anyone's ever wanted. Money. There's some teasing for you. I will say the college baseball tournament has been exciting. I think 10 walk-offs so far. Lots of incredible play. All your most hated teams generally have been eliminated, Arkansas, Texas, and the like. And I was not going to watch much of it. I've been pulled into it more than I thought I would. I'll be interested to hear from the audience and otherwise if you're interested, less interested, not interested at all because Texas Tech is not playing. Because I feel like if you're a college baseball fan, you just like college baseball. Like if you're into it all year, more than just watching some Texas Tech games maybe one a weekend, you're truly a college baseball fan. And I feel like that's the pile I fall into. I said I wasn't going to watch much, and then I've watched a ton of college baseball over the last weekend. So I'll be interested to see in the coming week how many people have been tuning in. It seems like it's been very popular in the Discord. If you want to get in the Discord, you can. Patreon.com/Gamblin Gauchos. Steven Stevens says he's been interested enough to watch Squeeze Play. Squeeze Play is great. I don't like the 6 boxes they put up there. That's a little hard to follow from across the room. But I like the quad box, the 3 box, the double barrel. Those are all nice. Money, what have you been doing this weekend? You got back from Boston safely?
Yeah, I've been sleeping a bunch, honestly. Now I'm watching the Stars in their season, most likely.
Yeah, it's not been great. Since you were up, what, 2-0? A game or two ago, you hadn't really played well. So, it's frustrating.
I have been compelled to watch college baseball, though. I haven't actually done it, but it's been all over my feed and people posting highlights and stuff. And I feel like it's like I'm always interested in postseason for almost any sport. Like I'll find time to watch a couple of games, but I feel like there's so much action in college baseball that like at some point during this postseason, I'll make some time to turn it on and sit down and watch quite a bit of it.
Yeah, the super regionals honestly are a little easier to get into because you say, all right, I like those 2 teams. Let's watch those 2 teams this weekend. Or even the College World Series because it's all in one place. The games are on at one at a time. The regionals are a little bit overwhelming, honestly. You're a big college basketball fan, but even the first weekend of the college basketball tournament it's electric, it's awesome, but there's almost too many games on to keep up with. So you kind of have to pick your lane, and that's how it's been with college baseball a little bit. But again, I did enjoy the Ragin' Cajuns beating Texas this afternoon, and I'll start there with some of the points I wanted to talk about today. David Pierce has been in Austin for several seasons now. Has had a couple of down seasons and a couple of pretty good seasons. This season, I thought, was middle of the road, but then they had the Big 12 Player of the Year. They got up to, I think, 3rd in the conference by the end. They had some just baffling losses to go through in the season. Pretty good weekends, but not really great in the midweek. And after the game, he was asked point blank, will you be back next year? And David Pierce said, that's not my decision. Basically saying, yeah, I'll be back if they hire me back. we have seen the do-si-do that the Longhorns have done with Tim Tadlock a couple of times. It'll be interesting to see if you have a do-si-do again, because Tadlock has, I don't know, had similar experiences to Pearson the last couple of years. He's not been back to Omaha. Maybe you think, hey, we'll give Tim Tadlock more money, more NIL, more facilities, better facilities, and he'll be back in Omaha if you get him. But I do not know who Texas will go after, but they've gone after Tadlock before. So if there is a job opening, I would be a little worried. I don't know.
Interesting. I hadn't even put those pieces together, but it's a fair point, and I think it is probably a fair point now because of the season you just had. Like, if you had had a successful season, you were in the postseason, I think you'd feel a little bit better about it. But yeah, that's interesting.
And I don't know if Tadlock would entertain that. I'm not in the mind of Tim Tadlock, but I will say this. They do have pretty good facilities. They do have an NIL component that probably exceeds what Texas Tech can do in the baseball world. We've seen what Texas Tech can do in the basketball world. It's competitive with the top, I think, of who's going on. I'm not saying I think Tim Tadlock would be number one on their board and that Tadlock would have Texas number one on their board. I don't think that's true. I just, as a Texas Tech fan, am always a little wary, right? You have to be a little wary. And I think Tim Tadlock is still a top 10 coach in college baseball that should be up for those jobs. I still believe in Tim Tadlock. And for what that's worth, I think Texas Tech still believes in Tim Tadlock and that they'll do what they can to keep him. So I'm not worried per se, but it's in the back of your head, I think, if they move on from Pierce, which I don't know if they move on from Pierce, but it's been floating, and I didn't believe it. And then that was said in the press conference directly after a 10-1 loss before a regional final. They didn't even get to the regional final against A&M, and they booted that A&M game last night. Just booted it in the late innings. In extra innings. I think it was the 11th. Did you watch this? It was the 11th inning, and there was a play at third, like a swinging bunt, that the guy just fell down and it hit him in the crotch and bounced off of him. And then there was a pass ball right after that. So they scored on back-to-back errors and then just flailed in the bottom of the 11th to lose. So frustrating way to go. And then they lost by 10. I think they gave up 8 or 9 in the 7th or 8th to just completely collapse against the Raging Cajuns. So tough weekend for Texas. A lot of Big 12 teams still in it. In championship games tonight, let's see. Oklahoma down 2-0 to Connecticut in the Norman Regional. Kansas State beating SEMO 7-2. That would win that regional. The Fayetteville Regional, Arkansas lost to SEMO earlier this afternoon. Oklahoma State up on Florida. I believe that would win that regional. That's in the 3rd inning. And then West Virginia, Grand Canyon, 2-1 in that regional in the bottom of the 1st. So West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, all still alive. UCF lost to Florida State, or is losing to Florida State currently. And you know what? I think Oklahoma might have to beat UConn twice, because Oklahoma played earlier today. That's right. And then UCF looks like they're going to be eliminated by Florida State. So Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kansas State still all in it currently. Texas the only Big 12 team eliminated so far. All right, some things have come out over the weekend. Let's stay in Tech baseball currently. Gage Harrelson and Travis Sanders both officially in the portal. There will be more. Let's flip to the basketball portal. Toppin commits. Let's see. Last Monday we talked on Memorial Day, and you said likely Tuesday. I pushed it to like 8 a.m. It was, I think, 11 by the time it actually came out. But you were correct that it was going to happen on Tuesday. Tech Hoops Guy and I talked about it on Wednesday, but what are your thoughts on Toppin, the roster? Because after the transfer portal closed on Wednesday, there was some top 20s, some top 25s, some top 30s all put out, and Texas Tech populating that kind of area. And Joe Lenardi put them at a 4 seed, which would be a top 16 at the end of next season. Do you feel like that's right with this roster and Toppin included? Or do you think that's a little early to be saying that kind of stuff?
Yeah, the honest answer is it's probably too early. I always like to see how the pieces fit, but on paper, when we talked on Monday, I said this was your biggest need was a starting big man, especially at the caliber of Toppin, and now you have that. And so I'm really excited about his game. Really, really good around the rim on both ends. Has good shot blocking instincts. Stays on his feet a lot. Like he's not overzealous in blocking shots, only 2.5 fouls per game last season. So that tells you a little bit about his discipline, his intelligence only as a freshman, which is really promising, especially when you get him with a defensive minded coach like Grant McCaslin. Kind of think about what he can get out of that. But then offensively, too, I think a fair qualm to have with last year's team was the lack of rebounding. Sometimes it's an overrated thing, but when you get dominated on the glass, especially in games like you had against Baylor, and I know you were dealing with injuries in that game, specifically with Warren Washington, but just kind of shows you, when you have an elite offensive rebounder available, it's a really, really good idea to go after them. And Toppin is exactly that, almost 4 offensive rebounds per game last season. Really, really good on putbacks. And so I think his presence around the rim is going to be immediately felt. And then I think kind of the area where I think he can really hit his ceiling is if the shot comes along a little bit more. Showed some flashes of it last year, 11 to 32 from deep. But if he can kind of turn into a floor spacer and start making some of those shots out of the pick and roll and turn those into pick and pops, like I think we're looking at a first round draft pick. Now that has to click, obviously, but I mean, he's got potential that, hasn't really come through Texas Tech in a few years. Like your last draft pick was Jemias Ramsey, and he was a late second rounder. Before that, you had Culver and Zaire Smith before, going all the way back to Andre Emmett. So, this is not a Kentucky caliber program that's churning out first round draft picks every year. So it feels, a little silly to say, hey, this is, one of the best draft prospects that have been on this team in a while, but he certainly seems to be the closest caliber if it all comes together next season. And I think with the pieces that you're surrounding him with a guy like Hawkins who can initiate the offense, D5 who can kind of create some of that defensive gravity, pull defenders away from the paint. It's hard for me not to be optimistic that he's going to be even better next year.
When we saw a step up from Darren Williams last year from his freshman of the year campaign in the Mountain West to Texas Tech, and it really came together in Big 12 play. If you could have another step from him and a step from Toppin as well, I mean, it's hard to say you're not going to be pretty dadgum good. Torvik has the roster projections. I believe right now, I don't remember the order, but Kansas, Houston, and Iowa State are like 1, 2, 3 in the country. Texas Tech considered the 4th best roster in the Big 12 at 15th in the country. And then I want to say Arizona maybe was 17th. Way too early. put you on the spot. Those top five, do you think that'll be the top five in Big 12 play? I mean, is that what you're looking at if you were to rank them right now?
Yeah, probably so. I think Kansas has the best overall roster. Um, maybe even in college basketball. I know a lot of people are kind of split between Kansas, UConn, and Alabama as the best roster as it stands right now. I think Iowa State is going to be really good. I think Baylor is going to be really good. I think the team that I'm still kind of waiting and seeing on is Houston. And I think a big part of that is because they lost their engine and Shed. Now they've done a good job at retaining key pieces and bringing in some good guys from the portal, like Uzon from Oklahoma. But yeah, I think kind of those 5 teams are going to be where you're around for most of the season. And I think again, like it's all about fit. Basketball is all about fit and how pieces play alongside one another. But I think if those 5 rosters kind of click the way the staffs who assembled them wanted to, those should be 5 of the better teams in the country. And I think, yeah, absolutely. Well, I might think talking about tournament seeding is a little silly right now. Like this Texas Tech team is a top 25 team on paper to me. I would say somewhere in the 20s right now because you've got to see how it comes together and how it actually plays out. But this is a good team. Like the staff has done a good job at assembling a roster that is not only talented, but I feel like is really complementary in how they can play together.
Go back to baseball for a second. A couple of more transfers I missed from today. Garrett Baum and Davis Rivers, who was a freshman this year. They'll have 3 years of eligibility left. Interesting. Very interesting with Davis Rivers transferring out. If Bazell is drafted, and I think he's a draft eligible sophomore, you're that's an interesting predicament for your catching. Anyways, let's see. Yeah, college basketball rosters, they're not complete yet. If you see 1 or 2 more players added to the Texas Tech roster, what would you be looking for? Because I think you have a starting lineup, yes? Probably.
Yeah, I would say so.
So you're probably looking for, I don't know, another young player or a senior just to come in and run some minutes, right?
Yeah, maybe a wing. I think kind of like a 3-and-D role player wing would be a good fit on this team. You've got guys in that position right now. Like I think Kerwin Walton will do quite a bit of that again. But if you can get a guy who is a more focused on the defensive end of the floor, I think you take him. You've got 3 spots left, so may as well.
Do you think there's room still in the rotation, or are you pretty? You're talking about the 15th best roster, like right now. Do you think there's room for another, I don't know, 6th, 7th guy on the bench to come off?
Yeah, it'd be tough. But I think if the talent is there, you certainly try and get it. But again, like we've seen McCaslin's philosophy play out, and he runs a pretty short bench. And that may have been, the roster that was assembled last year. Maybe it was more of that. But I do think that, most teams are not getting more than 8 or 9 deep, especially in conference play and postseason play. So I think you feel good with what you have right now. If you think there's room to kind of slide another guy in and distribute those minutes accordingly, I don't see why you wouldn't do it.
So we're looking for wings. All right. The SEC and Netflix are reportedly nearing a deal on a new college football documentary series. College football fans could soon get a behind-the-scenes look at the SEC. I would assume this is going to be like Netflix's Quarterback or Drive to Survive or the Full Swing Show, but also like HBO's or Amazon's kind of in-season NFL shows. Greg Sankey declined to comment on the report. He says, "We make announcements when we make announcements, despite what sources like to say nothing's done until it's done." So it's not a for sure thing, but the show being what the show is, I would enjoy it. I would watch it. I think it would be really cool. But to me, the more important factor here is with the eye on revenue sharing and paying players through the university instead of through things like the Matador Club. If the university's on the hook, an extra $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, $10 million per school through an SEC Netflix deal is going to be huge. Brett Yormark was asked about some things like this. And in response, he said, "We're open for business more than we've ever been open for business." And somebody's like, "Oh, that means expansion." He's like, "No, that doesn't mean expansion. It never meant expansion. The Big 12 is open for business in making money for their teams." Do you like the idea of a behind the scenes all access look? Do you think it would be beneficial to the student athlete, A, and beneficial cost wise to make enough money to help the schools out, even on top of the media payout, which, by the way, the Big 12 had a record payout this season?
Yeah, I think maybe. But I'm all for the show just because I would enjoy it as a viewer. I mean, I love kind of sports docu-series, behind the scenes looks at things. Like I've loved Hard Knocks. And so I think like that style of show would be a lot of fun to see, especially at the collegiate level, because we haven't really seen anything like that. And even just kind of getting like behind the scenes videos, from Texas Tech athletics the last couple of years, they've started trying to do a little bit more of that, a little bit more peeking behind the curtain, full cinematic recaps with clips from the locker room that, have backfired in some cases, have, been useful in hyping up the fans in other areas. But yeah, I would enjoy it a lot. As a viewer, in terms of the benefits, I think it would come down to what the actual payout is, and kind of what that system is based on. Like, is it based on who gives the most access? Is it, you know, which teams have been historically the most successful? That's what I would be interested to learn a little bit more about. Because I imagine, like, if Georgia and Vanderbilt both opt in, like, those are two draws that have very different weights.
Yeah, there would have to be some kind of language to know that all the schools would get an even payout. Not necessarily SEC. I don't care if the SEC does that, but if it was a Big 12 thing, if the Big 12 did this, I would want even payouts. And I think in the Big 12, you're much more even. And I wouldn't really worry about that in the Big 12, especially in football, because I just think it's going to be so competitive top to bottom that I don't see you worrying about that. Certainly in the SEC, Alabama with a new coach is going to be a highly sought after behind the scenes look. LSU, Georgia, Florida, even though they're probably not going to be the best team, is going to be fascinating behind the scenes with what they've got going on. But then you look at like a Vanderbilt or even a Mississippi State, and it's like, okay, like the SEC is certainly top heavy, especially from a national perspective. Missouri, are people really going to care what Dorkowitz is doing? Even though they were pretty good last year. Kentucky, I don't know. It is what it is. But I think in the Big 12, all across the Big 12, you could have some interesting stories if you did something like that. And I would not be surprised to see the Big Ten do it either. But I think there's even a greater chasm in the Big Ten. You're going to want basically 4 or 5 schools, maybe 6 or 7 now with the addition of the Pac 12 schools. But nobody cares what Northwestern or Rutgers or Maryland are doing in week 3 or 4. Nobody cares. And they probably care even less about Rutgers in week 9 because they're 3 and 6 and whatever. Nobody cares. So we'll see. We'll see what pans out, and if it's this year or next. Probably wouldn't come out till after the season, or at least late in the season. If they come out weekly or all together, it would have to be after the season. So interesting. I just like that Brett Yormark is on the hunt because that is so different from what the Big 12 has been the decade previous, where you were just sitting back and letting things come to you.
Yeah, he gets it. He's an entrepreneur. At the end of the day, he's building a business, and I think that's been pretty clear since day one. I think he's done a good job at executing that thus far.
Certainly. Let's see. Brett Yormark had another comment. I think we might have talked about this on Wednesday. Did we talk about? Oh no, it was Sunday maybe. Regardless, the private equity. Did we talk about that?
Yeah.
All right. So Brett Yormark was always also talked about, asked about the private equity, and he seemed on board, which is interesting. But I shouldn't be surprised because he comes from that world. I mean, he comes from the privately owned, the Barclays Center, the NASCAR, whoever it is. He comes from that world of sports having owners, and so it'll be interesting to see because if you could get the Big 12 on the forefront of private equity and maybe beat the SEC and the Big 10 there, it would be interesting to see how everything else shakes out. If you could get corporate sponsors, that was another report that came out in the last week. Field sponsors and jersey sponsors could be coming to college football. I'm all for that. I was a proponent of when the Big 12 was breaking up, coming up with enough schools and calling it the Nike Athletic Conference or whatever it's going to be. If that would entice Phil Knight and Oregon to come down, you could certainly find some other conference. It will not ruin the integrity of college football any more than it's already been ruined to have a big old what's the new energy company? NRG, but what's Reliant Energy? AT&T, Jones AT&T Stadium, Cody Campbell Field, presented by Reliant Energy. I mean, that does not bother me in the slightest. It's just another thing for the TV announcers to say. Doesn't bother me at all. If you want to slap Optimum on there or whoever else locally has the juice to do it, and then put whoever else, Phillips 66, Dr. Pepper on the jerseys, go for it. That does not bother me at all. Now, if it becomes a soccer jersey kit and it says Dr. Pepper across the chest instead of Texas Tech, I might have some qualms there. If you're putting out maroon uniforms once a year to do the Dr. Pepper Day, I would not like that. But if it doesn't affect the jersey too much, I'm not opposed to any patch on the uniform. Major League Baseball has done this. You can't hardly see it. It's on the sleeve. The NBA does it, and I can't say that I even know who is on whose jersey because you just don't really see it. So none of that bothers me. Are you opposed to putting some extra logos on the field or putting a patch on the jersey?
No, I mean at the end of the day, it's an extra check that's going to get cashed. So I think that's the overall benefit to it. But I agree. Like I remember when I think the NBA was actually the first team to kind of adopt uh, on jersey patches. And I remember when they did that, they like it seemed like the public reception was so poor. Like everybody was freaking out that it was gonna like ruin the aesthetic, ruin the look, and it just it does not matter. It's so small that you can hardly tell. So I'm not against it. I would be interested to see how it's executed on football jerseys because that's something we haven't really seen. I don't believe the NFL does uh, jersey patches unless I'm mistaken, but I can't think of seeing one. Um, so yeah, I'd be interested to see what it looks like on a football uni.
Yeah, and if it goes across the rest of the sports, it would, basketball, we've seen it in the NBA, baseball, we've seen it in Major League Baseball. So it doesn't bother me at all. Kellen Buffington is quote tweeting you. Did you see this?
I did, yes.
It's pretty entertaining. It's just another note on top. And do you want to give it to her? I think you gave it earlier. Let's do it to the effect about
Yeah,
a rim
he's
pressure.
he's in really good company. Like obviously, when I pull these stats, like I'm looking at a guy's numbers, so I know what to filter. So it's intentionally going to highlight them, but when you're in the same company as Zach Edey, Drummond, Kenneth Faried, Tristan Thompson, like those are all NBA guys. Like that's good company. And so if he continues to play at the level that he's playing, and that stat was based on offensive rebounding rates and block rates, if you continue to play it that way on both ends of the floor, you're going to make a pretty compelling case to play at the next level.
NBA wise, you mentioned him being an NBA prospect earlier. Is there anybody else you think could sneak into the draft? I mean, Darian Williams or even like Elijah Hawkins that could potentially be drafted if you have a great year?
Yeah, I think Darion Williams for sure. Like I think a lot of it has to depend on if he can be a little bit more athletic and like improve with some lateral quickness and perimeter defense, 3-point shooting, obviously, even though I mean he was a great shooter last year. For his improvements made there and his efficiency, but I think he's probably number two and wouldn't know exactly where to place him at this point in time in terms of his draft status. But yeah, I think like he certainly could have tested the waters this offseason and it wouldn't have been a crazy idea. Now, do I think he would have gotten drafted? Maybe not. But to get some of that feedback, yeah, I don't think that would have been a horrible idea. But glad that he kind of had his eyes set on Lubbock and never really looked back on that.
Kansas State has advanced to the Super Regionals. UCF has been beaten. Florida State advances to the Super Regionals. Oklahoma State has taken a lead. So there you go. Let's see. Let's go back to the rundown here. Oh, here's a question off the chat line. Can Money give me a Mavs Celtics breakdown? Surprised to see Boston such a big favorite.
Yeah, me too. I don't think Boston is very deep, which I think gives the Mavs an advantage because they've used their bench well. Um, Throughout these playoffs, you've had guys like Jaden Hardy who have stepped up and played well in select minutes. Obviously, the 1-2 punch you have coming off the bench with your bigs and Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford kind of playing split minutes for what's really one role has been huge. Maybe the defining factor outside of Luka and Kyrie, just because of how good those two guys have played, and you've been able to keep them both fresh. Obviously, Lively getting a little banged up, but looks like he'll be all right. You've got Kleber back now. So I'm excited to kind of see Luca versus KP. I'm interested to see what that will look like on the biggest stage. I'm guessing Porzingis will be back and healthy for the finals after their extended rest. So excited to kind of see that storyline. But I really think, postseason basketball is always going to be about your best players. So who's going to play better between Luca and Kyrie and Tatum and Brown? That's the biggest question. Now, I think the Celtics have a better starting five than Dallas does in terms of what they're able to do, especially defensively. Like, you've had Derek White step up and play incredible these playoffs. They have Drew Holiday, who's as consistent of a defender as anybody. But in terms of those top twos, like, it feels silly to kind of overlook Luca and Kyrie at this point in the playoffs and what they've been able to do. So I think it's about getting both of those guys playing consistently well. But if they can do that, I think they absolutely can win this series.
Would you take Mavs in like 7? If they win, it's going to be in 7, a full series, and then Celtics probably could win it in 5.
I would say my gut feeling right now is Mavs in 7. Now, I'm a little bit of a homer, so
Sure, same.
I'm sure that's factoring in there. But if it's not Mavs in 7, I still think it'll be Celtics in 6. I think that's like worst case scenario. I really struggle to see Boston blowing them out of this series. If they win the series, I think it'll be competitive. I think it'll go to at least 6.
Barnett, Howard, and Williams has been recognized as the best law firm in Fort Worth. They're based in Fort Worth, but they do business across the state of Texas. Criminal defense, personal injury, family law, they do it all. They don't want you to have to call them, but if you need them, they are there for you. More information on Barnett, Howard, and Williams and the fine people that are double Texas Tech graduates at bhwlawfirm.com. Any other thing that is tickling your fancy to talk about today there, Money?
Just baffled that the Stars have 27 shots on goal. The Oilers have 8, and the Oilers are up 2-0.
Yeah. It's not great. Those are not great stats. Lots of political questions in the mailbag. I'm going to ignore all of them. Just rolling through to see if there are any money-specific questions that we could get to today. All right, here's one political question. Who is more famous, Nancy Pelosi or Bill Belichick?
Is it crazy to think Bill Belichick?
I think maybe more people have heard the name Nancy Pelosi, but more people could tell you Bill Belichick was a football coach. I don't know that people know what Nancy Pelosi does beyond just being Nancy Pelosi. All right. Well, the rest of it is we could do Wednesday. Okay. 38 minutes of us. I think that's a new record, but we're not going to sit here and stretch it out. Thank you for listening, watching, being involved. Again, next Sunday will be very exciting. Wednesday, we will record on Twitch, the Gamblin Gauchos Twitch, behind the paywall of the Patreon, patreon.com/Gamblin Gauchos. You can listen to it there as well, reposted. Otherwise, we will see you next Sunday right here on YouTube, youtube.com/@Gamblin Gauchos for all of your enjoyment and ours as well. Okay. Love y'all.